We'll start now. Subcommittee on Financial Services and General Government will come to order. This hearing is titled Oversight of the U.S. Postal Service. Members will have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I'd like to thank General Hull for being here today. The United States Postal Service is a mainstay for most, if not all, of our constituents and our communities. Its operations are vast, with 640,000 employees working to deliver millions of pieces of mail and packages daily. Yet the Postal Service has faced significant financial challenges over the last several decades. Except for the fiscal year 2022, the Postal Service has incurred losses in each of the fiscal years since 2007. Last year, the USPS lost more than $9.5 billion. The Office of the Inspector General, OIG, plays a critical role in righting the Postal Service ship. It's more than 900 employees across the country protect the integrity and the accountability of America's Postal Service, its revenues, its assets, and its employees. There's no better example of the OIG's importance than with the Postal Service Delivering for America Plan, or DFA. The DFA is a 10-year strategic plan intended to transform the Postal Service into self-sustaining and a high-performing entity. However, the DFA has been controversial. It has impacted mail service and delivery, particularly in rural communities. The OIG has identified issues with the DFA's launch of the Regional Processing and Distribution Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and with the Local Transportation Optimization Initiative in Richmond, Virginia. And according to the OIG, many of the projections of which the DFA was developed are no longer relevant. In addition to the challenges of the DFA, mail crime has increased significantly over the last several years. The OIG plays a critical role in investigating crimes that occur within the Postal Service and throughout the mail system. For example, in fiscal year 2024, the OIG arrested 89 individuals involved in narcotics trafficking and helped secure 65 convictions. God bless you. In total, the OIG's investigative division has completed just under 1,400 investigations, leading to 401 arrests and a return of approximately $11 million to the Postal Service. Finally, in conducting many of the audits and investigations, the OIG has embraced the use of technology. I look forward to learning more about how the OIG leverages technology, including the use of AI to conduct its work. Again, I want to thank you for being here today, and I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for scheduling this hearing with Ms. Hull. Obviously, this is a very important hearing. The Postal Service performs an extraordinary service. In fact, it's one of the first services that our founding fathers established so that the colonies and later the United States of America could be connected in all of its areas. This is a very, very important service that they perform. And obviously, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the operating deficit that they have. One of the reasons for that, of course, is unlike a private sector company, it delivers to places that are not profitable and are costly and give a service, but do not pay their way, if you will. So I appreciate this hearing so that Ms. Hull, the Inspector General, and I thank you for coming by my office, can bring us up to date on what you do and what your recommendations are with respect to the Postal Service going forward. Mr. Chairman, I am a strong supporter of the public Postal Service. Do not believe it ought to be privatized, because if it is privatized, it will obviously curtail, particularly in rural areas in our country, services that they now have, but which are not cost effective. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, let me say, and I'll submit a statement for the record. I know you'd like to hear it all, but I'll submit it for the record. But I would want to say I appreciate my short discussion both with staff and with you, that we are seeking to get the testimony of a significant number of the agencies over which we have jurisdiction. In particular, of course, I am very concerned about DOJ, OMB, and OPM, who over the last 90 days have had an extraordinary impact on our country. My belief is it's going to prove to be a very negative impact on our country, but it's certainly an impact which was not contemplated by the Congress of the United States nor provided for in our budgets. and agencies and departments and offices are being eliminated without congressional authority, and employees are being fired, riffed, displaced, whatever you want to refer to it, inconsistently with the law. So that I think it is absolutely essential that Mr. Musk, Ms. Gleason, Mr. Vogt, and others who have been involved in this process very deeply testify before this committee that has jurisdiction over their actions and their budgets. Although DOJ is using the budget of a previously established agency, but within our jurisdiction and including the White House, which is within our jurisdiction. And I'm pleased to hear that we're going to pursue that, because I believe that, frankly, government by executive order was not contemplated by our founding fathers, is not consistent with the Constitution. Every president has used executive orders extensively. This president, however, seems to be governing by executive order without regard to the authority of the Congress of the United States. So I'm pleased that we're going to be hearing from the principals who are directly involved in this. And I thank the committee for pursuing that objective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. Today we welcome the testimony of Tammy Hull, Inspector General for the United States Postal Service. General Hull, without objection, your full written testimony will be entered into the record. With that in mind, we ask you to please summarize your opening statement in 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Hoyer, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss oversight of the Postal Service and our fiscal year 2026 budget needs. We are a data-driven, tech-forward organization using 21st century methods to identify fraud, waste, and abuse and promote economy, efficiency, and integrity in America's Postal Service. We are lean with around 1 employee for every 690 postal employees. We are one of the most active OIGs, making nearly 4,000 arrests over 5 years. During that period, our identification of fraud has returned more than $2.5 billion to the federal government and other victims, and about $400 million going directly back to the Postal Service. We prevented $1.2 billion more in future fraudulent payments. The Postal Service is a critical resource to the American public, providing 6-day-a-week mail and package delivery in every town, city, and state across the country. The Postal Service is at a point where it must make difficult decisions involving trade-offs between service and financial health. We provide essential oversight over the planning and implementation of postal changes, including whether they are resulting in expected cost savings and efficiencies. We also review the resulting impacts on people and businesses in urban, suburban, and rural America. Timely delivery of mail has been affected, sometimes dramatically, by implementation challenges with the Postal Service's plan. Rural areas in particular have been impacted more heavily. Our work provides transparency into where and why service issues are occurring at both local and national levels. We have provided actionable solutions to address these impacts. Additionally, the Postal Service's plan has not yet resulted in the financial gains it had originally projected. Initial financial projections are no longer relevant, and despite our recommendation, the Postal Service has not publicly shared updates to these projections. We promote transparency into postal finances, as well as provide options to improve the Postal Service's financial health. We have identified over $1 billion in potential labor cost savings through better management of employees. We have quantified significant structural issues not experienced by competitors or other government agencies that create large financial burdens. We have also identified opportunities to better invest the hundreds of billions of dollars it is required to set aside to fund retiree benefits. Our work protects the American public and businesses at a time when crimes are becoming more common, more complex, and more difficult to stop. We are taking aggressive actions to identify and stop theft of checks and credit cards from the mail, including partnering with banks to create sophisticated analytical models that identify exactly where within a facility the mail is being stolen. We also protect the country from organized drug traffickers who collude with postal employees and use the mail to ship narcotics. Our investigations stop postal employees and healthcare providers from stealing hundreds of millions of taxpayer and ratepayer dollars through false workers' compensation claims. We are a proactive and responsive organization to the American public, to postal stakeholders, and to Congress. Our relatively flat budget has resulted in a loss of employees over time. We make the most of our limited resources by using sophisticated analytics to effectively allocate our budget and personnel. For example, we are beginning to leverage AI to organize millions of customer complaints, allowing us to quickly find where there may be delivery problems. Data insights also allow us to determine where our quick response teams should visit, where criminals are recruiting postal employees on social media sites, and where healthcare providers may be fraudulently charging the Postal Service. While data analytics and AI have allowed us to be more strategic and efficient, they have also highlighted how much more we could do. We've identified more than 100,000 potentially actionable leads that we do not have the resources to address. A decline in funding will only make that worse. For fiscal year 2026, we originally asked for a budget of $306.7 million, all of which would be funded by the Postal Service and not tax revenues. This would allow us to expand our investigative efforts to root out additional fraud, waste, and abuse. With these funds, we could build new, enhanced tools to independently monitor service, increasing our ability to react quickly as the Postal Service rolls out additional changes that impact Americans and their mail service. We are proud to keep Congress and the American public informed about the Postal Service, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Incredible timing as well. I now recognize myself for questions. General Hall, for the first quarter of fiscal year 2025, there were 2 U.S. Postal Service districts in Ohio, one of which includes my district, that were among the worst service performance for single-piece first-class mail service. The Ohio 1 U.S. Postal Service District, which includes the 14th Congressional District, reported on-time 2-day mail service only 72% of the time. 3 to 5 day mail was on time approximately 59% of the time. Disturbingly, the other U.S. Postal Service district was worse scoring for their performance in quarter 1. General Hull, why has service performance declined over the last decade? Your office has undertaken several audits examining the services that U.S. Postal Service provides, particularly as part of a Delivering for America plan. Why is on-time delivery so difficult? And in your opinion, is Delivering for America failing us? And how can we ensure that the Postal Service is providing quality, cost-effective services?
Thank you for the question. I think some of the challenges the Postal Service has faced relate to many of the changes that have been implemented with the DFA. When mail flows change, it's a big network, and when changes are made to the mail flow, a lot of things break, and that has happened with the DFA. I think some of the things that the Postal Service could have done to prevent some of these things, we saw in, for example, in Atlanta when they implemented the large RPDC, that they did not do a good job of making sure the staff was ready for it, that supervisors were trained, that people were in place so that when the changes were implemented, they could be absorbed more easily and more quickly. They also have challenges with maintaining experienced and trained supervisors across the country in many of their places. They have difficulty with ensuring that employees are clear on what the expectations are every day. It's a business that you do basically the same thing day after day after day. So it's really important that you have staff in place that are trained and that they are understand what the expectations are every day, and that supervisors are there to make sure that what should be occurring is actually occurring. So those are some of the things that we've seen in our work and some of the things that we're reporting to the Postal Service so that they can hopefully address many of these things across the country.
Well, what can we do to ensure that the Americans, is the Postal Service is actually servicing rural Americans?
I think obviously I'm from a rural area, and I really appreciate the service that the Postal Service provides rural communities across the country. And it's really, really important to all areas of the country, but particularly in rural America. One of the reasons that we launched some of our work recently on local transportation optimization, which was kind of a pilot for the Postal Service to see how, if they change the way they pick up mail across the country, instead of picking up at the end of the day, they pick it up the next day, how that would impact some of these communities. And when they did that, we wanted to go out as well and see what that impact would look like. And we saw significant impacts across America, but mostly in those rural areas. Rural areas were much more likely to be impacted negatively in the service with that initiative. So the Postal Service saw that as well, and then they went in and made a change to their service standards to increase the amount of time that they would have in those areas. We want to keep up the oversight over the rollout of that regional transportation optimization, so that we can not only evaluate impacts across the country, but to focus on what that is doing in rural America.
I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Hoyer, for any questions he may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me ask you, what impact did the have on your service of freezing at the 24 levels of funding?
I'm sorry?
What impact did the continuing resolution at 24 numbers have on your agency, and what could you not do that you think you needed to do in order to effectively do your job?
Yeah, appreciate it. We have, over the last couple of years, lost more than 10% of our staff. And as a result, that's kind of what has contributed to our identification of these leads. We're getting better in the technology and how we use technology to identify leads, but technology does not investigate crime, it does not arrest people, it does not put people in jail, and it doesn't do audit work so that we can report and make recommendations to the Postal Service. There are things that computers do very well, and there are things that we need people to do. So we've had to reduce both auditors and investigators by more than 10%.
And what can you estimate the cost of that? The recovery or the fraud or waste that was not identified?
Right. There's clearly an impact in that. We identify about $13 for every dollar that is spent on our budget. So there's a significant impact in that. I think we as an OIG are a little bit different than other IGs in that we have slightly more than half of our staff are in the investigative side, because the Postal Service has such a large employee population that move things of value across a network. There's lots of opportunity for mischief. And so there's impacts not just in identification of potential efficiencies. There's also significant implications on our ability to stop crime, shipment of narcotics, also theft of checks and credit cards in the mail.
What was your total savings for the previous fiscal year from the investigations that you did?
Yeah, we generally identify about $1 billion on the audit side a year, and then about $250 million or so in the investigative side, but we'll get you the specific numbers on that.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Last question would be, there's been discussion about privatizing the services of the Postal Service. Have you made an analysis of what the cost would be in terms of service if that should occur?
Yeah, we recently issued a white paper, a research paper on where we looked at 25 posts around the world. And some of those posts have been partially or fully privatized. We wanted to kind of look at the implications of that, what it might mean for the Postal Service. And what we found as it relates to privatization is that it's a long road. It's not an easy thing to do, and it takes a long time for those that have been privatized. In fact, in the last 10 years, only one post in the world has been privatized. Most of the privatizations occurred much longer ago. The only post in the last 10 years that has been privatized is the Israeli post, which is much, much smaller, as you can imagine, than the Postal Service. The larger posts that have been privatized that we looked at, it took years to privatize. The service is different there than is in many of the non-privatized posts, and some of the long-term large liabilities that the Postal Service is facing. Some of those that were there in some of those other posts were moved to the government to be paid for before the privatization occurred, so that the post could be privatized. There's lots and lots. It's complicated, and if any of your staffs are interested in digging in deeper on that analysis, it's a really good paper, but it's very detailed. We'd love to sit down and talk with you all more about it.
Thank you. Perhaps you could submit that for the record.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome, sir. The chair now recognizes the Congresswoman from Iowa, Ms. Hinson.
Thank you to our chairman from Ohio, the great state, and our ranking member as well for holding this hearing. And thank you, Inspector General Hull, for coming to testify today. You know, I think it's absolutely critical that the American people can trust that their important documents, whether it's bills or just regular mail or election ballots, that those are getting from A to B safely and securely. And so I'm encouraged to hear more about your process in making sure that we are eliminating that fraud, waste, and abuse, and we are going after those bad actors. So that's what I want to start with, because last year, in response to some reports about missing mail from my district, and we had some inconclusive responses from USPS regarding that mail, I actually sent this letter to the Inspector General, Postmaster DeJoy, and then he actually referred that on to you. So I think that again, to instill that confidence in the U.S. Postal Service, I think it's really important to understand how these concerns are handled once they reach your level. So what processes do you have in place for investigating reports like this of improper deliveries, missing mail, those sorts of things? Yeah,
thank you for the question. We have some pretty sophisticated data analytics tools, and when we get a request, particularly a request from a member of Congress, we run that request through our data analytics tools to see if we can identify whether we see other activity by maybe a carrier in a postal facility or an employee in a plant, to see if other things of value are disappearing that we can connect to that. And then oftentimes we see that we may already be investigating an employee that in this kind of fits into an existing case. But if not, we can put it all together and then submit it to an agent to dig in deeper on. But just generally, our hotline is one of the most active hotlines in the IG community. We receive usually between 100,000 and 200,000 hotline complaints a year, sometimes more than that. I think last year we got almost 400,000 complaints. So there's a lot for us to look at. And so it's important for us to use artificial intelligence tools to analyze all of those complaints.
That was going to be my next question. So you talk about all of those complaints. Are you seeing, does your technology allow you then to flag, okay, we've had 10 complaints about the same person? Yes. Or so it allows you to categorize that and then more accurately go after where you need to use your resources?
It does. And one of the most exciting things that it has allowed us to do is to go back to closed cases that we've made over time, over the last 5 or 10 years, and identify what kinds of things make for a good mail theft investigation or make for a good healthcare fraud investigation. So, and then run that against the complaints, not just our hotline complaints, but also the complaints that come into the Postal Service. The Postal Service gets thousands of complaints every day, as you can imagine, from across the country. So we're able to evaluate the complaints the Postal Service has as well. And that's how we've identified, I mentioned 100,000 potentially actionable leads. We have used artificial intelligence and large language modeling to evaluate all of those complaints and identify the ones that look very, very similar to things we've already investigated and identified criminal activity on. And technology's been a very good tool for us.
Well, and I mentioned obviously that, we got kind of a lackluster response from USPS, which is why we had to send this letter in the first place. So I guess my next question, knowing all that and knowing that's your process, have you taken what you've learned in some of these cases, and then how do you make those recommendations to USPS on how to improve processes and transparency, especially when it comes to missing mail? Because again, we asked them, our constituents were very concerned. I mean, people are sending their bills in and they're not getting paid, and that has real financial impact on their bottom line.
Right. we do make recommendations to the Postal Service to address that, and we have a pretty good relationship with them. But as you can imagine, those complaints that you experienced in your district are happening all across the country. There are, particularly in the last few years, there have been lots of concerns about potential mail theft or mail just getting lost in the system. So we have done local work too, where we'll go in and look at the data, identify where the hot spots are around the country, and we'll send a team in that looks at a plant and the delivery units around that plant to identify specific recommendations we need to make to that area. So, but we can only do 8 or 10 of those a year. So there's many more that have issues.
Well, if you can flag for us, and I'll wrap here, if you can flag for us how many of those investigations don't have, at what point you need more resources for those, and how many maybe are going by the wayside or continuing because you don't have that would be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Pocan, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Thank you for being with us. Excuse me. So I do want to ask on the LTO audit report. That we were one of the 2 experiments in the country, Wisconsin and Virginia. This is when the former Postmaster General, and I do have to admit, I get in a little joy when I say former, about the Postmaster General. He said that when I talked about the problems that we've had with it, he said, well, the first rocket ship that went up blew up, which was not exactly the most satisfying answer I've had. But you did have an in-depth audit report that outlined a number of harmful effects. You concluded that the implementation of it in Wisconsin not only had a decrease in service, but in rural areas, even more of a decrease in service. I think the single piece first class 2-day mail declined for all but 1 week, and the 3 to 5 day performance declined every single week after implementation. So clearly the response by someone who's normal would have been to say we better reevaluate this before we go farther, and instead this is being expanded now nationwide, if I understand right. So I guess my questions are, can you talk a little more about what we learned on those harmful effects, and if this is going to be rolled out nationwide, which if I understand right, it is being rolled out, what's being done differently so that they also don't have rocket ships that blow up?
Yeah, it's a great question, and yeah, it was our team enjoyed being in Wisconsin, did some really good work there, I think, and identified some significant impacts, not just on service, but also just on how the rollout occurred. There were collection boxes that weren't being emptied so that the mail could enter into this system because they didn't understand how the process worked, and that some of the drivers that went out to pick up the mail at the end of the day also were picking up mail from collection boxes. So lots of challenges. The Postal Service, as you know, after the pilots that occurred in those locations, submitted a service standard change and is to give themselves more time in some of these rural areas to get the mail into the system, and is rolling out, I believe actually went forward with the rollout on April 1st. So we will be evaluating, our audit teams will be out there looking at the impact on rural areas and just on America in general to see how the rollout is occurring and whether or not, because the Postal Service, I think one of their arguments for it is that it's not going to delay beyond the 5 days. They have a 1 to 5 day standard.
So if I can just stop you there. So 24% of Wisconsin's affected by this rollout. And it sounds like you're saying they understand there's going to be delays in mail. We sent something recently from Madison to Milwaukee. It took 3 weeks to be delivered. Now, yeah. So, and it's our mail. So actually I know it happened, as opposed to, sometimes you get the stories from folks. But we also had the processing facility consolidation that also was paused. I'm not sure if it's restarted again, but, has that been restarted? And is there anything that we can do to unbreak what Postmaster DeJoy broke by doing that consolidation? Because our service not just from the LTO rollout, but because of the processing center rollout, has really deteriorated in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I appreciate what your experience being different than what the Postal Service is reporting in its service scores. And that's one of the reasons that we're requesting a little bit of additional money so that we can build a kind of a validation of the service that they're reporting. Because right now, we do not have the resources to do an independent validation of the service scores the Postal Service is reporting. We just don't have that, but we're getting really good at data and how to use data. I think there's a real opportunity for us to leverage that and be able to tell you and to hear from you what you're experiencing and to validate that in the Postal Service.
Do you know if they reinstituted the processing center consolidation?
I don't know, but we'll get back to you on that.
Okay, appreciate that.
Yes.
And then just one last question. How much interaction do you have with DOGE?
Not a lot. We had one meeting with the DOGE employees that were at the Postal Service.
And what was that meeting about?
It was just a kind of an introductory meeting with them, kind of so that we could share a bit of what we do as in our office.
Yeah, and who came from DOGE?
There were 2 DOGE employees that are at the Postal Service.
Could you get us the names of those folks? And if you have it, the contacts, because as a member of Congress, there's no email or phone number on the DOGE website. We called using our congressional liaison contacts, had no luck. We contacted the White House. They said, call back in 10 minutes. We called them back in 10 minutes, and we never have gotten a contact yet as a member of Congress for anyone at DOGE. So if you have 2 emails, phone numbers, I'd like to know the names and the contact information, because at least that'd be very helpful. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina for 5 minutes of questionings. Any, Mr. Evers?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hull, thanks for being with us today. As concisely as you can, would you tell us what is the job description of the Inspector General of the United States Postal Service?
It's a great
30
question.
seconds or less.
30 seconds or less? Yeah, to provide oversight of the Postal Service to promote integrity in the postal system.
And am I to assume that that position is independent of the Postal Service?
Yes.
Who decides to hire the Inspector General? I'm
Yeah.
looking for your direct report.
Yeah, at the Postal Service, it's different in the Postal Service than it is in some agencies, but at the Postal Service, the Inspector General is hired by the independent governors on the Board of Governors. And just recently, it's a little nuanced because 2 or 3 years ago, we also became the overseers of the Postal Regulatory Commission. And so the commissioners on the Postal Regulatory Commission are now also involved in the hiring process. I was already the Inspector General at the Postal Service, so they were not involved when I was originally selected, but they would be involved in the future.
And so these boards or entities that you're describing is responsible for your hire, are they part of the Postal Service?
They're like a board of directors over the Postal Service, I guess so, yes.
Who do you report to directly?
As in the Inspector General, I have the responsibility to keep the head of the agency and Congress fully and currently informed. So we mostly connect in the Congress with the oversight committees and then with the Board of Governors.
So just an observation, more for this panel, I think, than for you, is I'm not detecting independence. When I think of an Inspector General, my vision is that is the auditor of an entity, someone who is totally severed from the decisions, the process, and as a public servant, I take a lot more confidence in knowing that who we have overseeing and reporting back to Congress is really independent of the decision makers, the people that would hire that individual. The thing that cued me into this was Ms. Hull's opening statement. She used the words "we" and "our" probably about 50 times. That doesn't indicate to me independence. Nothing against you at all. I'm not criticizing you. I'm just wondering if we've got the right structure, particularly with an entity that's costing taxpayers so much money. And so that's a great big red flag here. And also I have to observe the number of times that you requested funds. Probably at least 3 times in this testimony I heard you say we're asking for a number of funds. So I just suggest to the panel that doesn't reek of independence. And I think that if we really want a more efficient government, the folks that we have overseeing it and reporting back to Congress should truly be independent. And so I'm hoping that that we can pursue this in some manner. My last question is really because the talk is that the United States Postal Service is not funded by the taxpayer, that it somewhat stands independent. Mm-hmm. But when I look at the fact that we've got losses year after year, those losses have to be backfilled by capital from somewhere. So could you describe to this panel what are the source of funds for operating capital in the years where we run deficits?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Postal Service is very cash-oriented business, as you can imagine. The long-term liabilities are very significant for the Postal Service. So in many cases, when the Postal Service runs a deficit, it is not contributing to some of those long-term liabilities, like some of the retirement fund liabilities they are not making the contributions to those that they would make if they did not run a loss. So that's the short answer. There's a longer answer, and we can get back to you and your staff. And I would love to talk to your staff more about that independence thing as well. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Washington, Mrs. Glusenkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brave attempt at Glusenkamp. We're doing great. My name's Marie. Glad to meet you. So my background, we used to run an auto repair shop. And one of the things that you know about if you're working in, have you ever heard of the term Kia boys?
No.
So is this phenomena where like basically they've, these keyless entry cars, they can dupe the signal and you can like buy the dupe online. And some of these Kias have become uninsurable in certain cities. Like the theft rates are just like off the charts. There's a real problem. And we're seeing that in other things. Just like the idea that technology is going to solve a problem is often, it's kind of a false hope. So this is kind of intersecting with another issue, which is I live in a really rural community. We are losing our pharmacies hand over fist. And so more and more, and we're an older population. So we have more and more people who are getting their prescriptions through the mail. I've heard about a shift to using digital keys on U.S. postal boxes. And I'm wondering, I know that like there's a high incentive to get into those boxes if you're trying to steal prescription drugs. And I also know that, when there is a, right now I know if you get one key, you get a certain set of boxes. If you get the digital key, I'm just wondering what you have learned in the implementation of these digital key systems, what the capacity is for shifting to a dual, analog and digital, what you're hearing.
Yeah, great question. We've done some work on mail theft in general and how the Postal Service is responding broadly to mail theft. Our own jurisdiction as it relates to mail theft is internal mail theft by postal employees.
Yeah.
The inspection service has the rest of it, which is significant. And so we've done a lot of work in different areas of the country to look at how they're rolling out some of the keys that you're talking about. I think there's multiple different solutions there. And I think some of them are more two-factor authenticated, multi-factor authenticated than others. And so we're looking at that in some of our audit work. I don't know specifically what we found, or I don't believe we found any of that duplication that you're talking about yet, but I could see it as a potential problem and something that we will be looking at as we move forward and as they roll out different technologies in that space.
It's like once you reach a certain scale, there's such a strong incentive for criminal actors And so it's like you can think it's okay
Right.
till you get all the way in the water. And so like I would just urge you to look at other models where that has led to profound, marginal rate of return for criminal actors and stealing my community's very necessary prescription drugs. Another question I had, mail carriers are like right up there with firefighters, right? Like they are a really critical linchpin in people having a sense of community. I remember reading a study that people who know the name of their mail carrier live an additional 3 years. Like just the sense of community connection and all of these ancillary things are critical to having a sense of a democratic country, nation where we know each other and have a system of laws and order. So as you're making, but we're seeing changes in delivery times, and we're seeing a lot of, I think what Mr. Bocan was getting at here with rural communities being sites for efficiency, but they're critical for our sense of community and for rural businesses. Every business that ships out is really relying on these. So I'm wondering, what other options are there besides cutting down service that rural communities rely on to keep costs down without impacting delivery times for our packages?
Yeah, I think obviously there are general efficiencies in the system, trying to identify more effective or efficient ways of doing business. I'm not sure that those are significant enough. That we identify probably about $1 billion a year in efficiencies to be gained in the system, and also potential revenue, additional revenue to be gained. The Postal Service is losing more than that in its finances, and so they're making some trade-offs. I'm not, I know that there's concern about some of the trade-offs that they're making, some of the decisions that we're making, and we at the OIG have similar concerns. We want to make sure that service is maintained in rural America the way that it needs to be maintained. I think some of those choices are going to be some of the difficult things moving forward for the Postal Service as it looks at its financial condition and determines. But we've also identified some structural issues, and I want to point to those. Those are larger and maybe more challenging because they'll require legislation to fix, but there are some opportunities in those larger structural areas, and we can talk more about that if your staff is interested.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. I appreciate that welcomed introduction. It's my job on this side of the aisle to back clean up for us. I'm the fourth person to go here. We've talked about a couple of different important issues, and I appreciate you being with us today. I want to talk a little bit about safety of our letter carriers, because since 2020, over 2,000 carriers have been assaulted or robbed, often for the arrow keys that Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez was talking about, that unlock dozens of mailboxes, opening the door to identity theft and financial fraud. Shockingly, and this is crazy to me, a mere 14% of those incidents wind up becoming prosecuted. In one case, a carrier was robbed at gunpoint, and the criminal got just 30 days. I think the safety of our postal workers shouldn't depend on geography or a prosecutor's discretion like that. It must be a national standard backed by serious consequences. Ms. Hull, are you aware of the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act, H.R. 1065?
Yes.
I'm a proud co-sponsor of this legislation that would strengthen postal workers' safety by funding secure replacements for those arrow keys. It would increase penalties for assaults on carriers, and it would require each U.S. Attorney's Office to designate a prosecutor to address the current 86% non-prosecution rate. Based on your experience, the job that you're in, and your position, do you believe these provisions would help reduce the incidence of assaults on letter carriers?
It seems that they would. I don't, I haven't analyzed the legislation to that level, but we have big concerns as well. We have more than half of our staff is law enforcement, and we work with the inspection service on on many of the cases that we start. Oftentimes, we're not sure at the beginning of a case whether it's an external or an internal or both that have collaborated on committing criminal activity. So we're supportive of the inspection service and in its efforts to prosecute these cases.
Great. I'm a little biased. I sponsor the legislation, so I think it will help. But tell us, based upon your experience and your position, what else can and should be done to help increase the safety of our letter carriers?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think making sure that there is good supervision, that supervisors know their letter carriers and that they're very attentive to their needs, that when a letter carrier is in a difficult neighborhood, because sometimes we forget these carriers are they're not all of the neighborhoods that these carriers are in every day look like your neighborhood or my neighborhood. Oftentimes they're in difficult neighborhoods and delivering mail every day to challenging places. So making sure that they're attuned to the needs of the letter carriers and watching out for the carriers and being responsive when the carrier needs help.
Great. In my 2 minutes left, I just want to shift gears a little bit to a more local issue. And the post offices throughout the nation are quite often cornerstones of our communities. But I have a frustrating thing going on in my district. About 2 years ago, on about May 26th of 2023, the post office in Sound Beach announced what they called a temporary closure 2 years ago for what they called structural repairs. And yet, despite them labeling it as temporary, that closure still exists today. For those 2 years, nearly 9,000 residents have been left without access to essential postal services and have been forced to go to a neighboring township, Miller Place, just to pick up their mail. I've repeatedly tried to work with some of your colleagues in the Postal Service to clearly, I'm talking about the management level, I'm not talking about the letter carriers who are hard at work every day. The management folks have blown us off for the last couple of years, just throwing bureaucracy at us. And I think that the Sound Beach case is a clear example of what happens when the Postal Service ignores its duty to serve the public. Mr. Hoyer talked about the roots being in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 7 gave Congress the opportunity to establish a post office, and it rightfully did. But by having essentially a closure of the post office that they're dismissing as temporary, but really seems to the community as permanent, is quite frustrating. So my question to you is, what does temporary mean in the post office with respect to a closure? Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it a year? Is it, or is it just an excuse to deny customer service?
We've done some work in this space in the past, and I don't know the last report that we issued in this area because it's something that comes up relatively frequently. So I don't know the answer on the definition the Postal Service uses for temporary, but I do know the problem that you express is not just in your district, it's in other places across the country. And it's something that we will look back into the work that we've done, and if there's a need to go back in and look at that again to see what the Postal Service is doing with these temporary closures, we will get with your staff and talk more about it. We'd be happy to, because I know it's a concern that happens frequently.
If you'll indulge me, Mr. Chairman, you as the Inspector General oversee fraud issues, right? What's the definition of fraud, basically?
Fraud is, this is probably not the dictionary definition, but it's taking money that doesn't belong to you.
With the intent to deceive. It's
Yes.
doing something with the intent to deceive in order to get a gain.
Yeah.
I think that telling our customers this is a temporary closure is an element of fraud. They're not telling the truth. They intend to save money by keeping services low, reduced, or even zero. And I think it's fraudulent. I think your office can look into that.
We can look into it. Thank you.
Chairman.
Chair now recognizes a gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop, for any questions he may have for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I was looking at the Postal Regulatory Commission's advisory opinion, and it made a number of recommendations. Can you comment on the extent to which the Postal Service has acted on those recommendations?
I probably am not the best person to answer that question. I don't know what they have done in response to the advisory opinion, except for the fact that they went ahead and rolled out the change on April the 1st.
And the advisory opinion actually suggested that it was not ready for rollout.
Right.
And of course, it identified a number of deficiencies in modeling and et cetera. You mentioned that there had been some consultations with your office, with DOJ. And I understand that I know that on January 13th, the Postal Service announced a voluntary early retirement program in an effort to reduce its workforce by an additional 10,000 people. And apparently in 2021, they shedded about 30,000 employees. As the Inspector General, do you feel that, or does your office feel that it was wise to make staffing reductions of that scale without regard for the existing local resources and the needs? And could a reduction in the workforce of this size aggravate the already identified delayed mail and inefficient delivery problems experienced by the Postal Service?
I imagine that it could. I also think that the Postal Service is a massive organization, and it's hiring thousands of people every year and letting thousands of people go every year. So it just depends on where those people are reduced from. If those locations are ones where they're already understaffed, then obviously it will have a significant impact. But it also could be absorbed because of the size of the employee population. It just depends on where that occurs.
But you're also in hiring the new people, and can you tell me, is there a net one-to-one replacement in people who are leaving and those who are coming in?
I don't know the answer to that, and I doubt that there.
Is that within the scope of your work?
Yes, and we've done some work on hiring at the Postal Service and identified challenges in the hiring process and identified many times where employee availability is a contributor to service issues. Sometimes they have employees that are on the rolls that aren't coming into work, and that's part of the problem. Sometimes they haven't hired effectively and brought in the people that they need to get the work done.
Isn't that a human resource personnel management?
It is.
Isn't that a management function?
Yes, but we do audit work. We don't handle that. We do audit work to do oversight of the Postal Service's activities in that space.
But you track that, though, as a part of your work.
Yes.
And I know that I have experienced, and my constituents complain to me constantly that they go to post offices and they don't have enough workers there to accommodate their needs.
Right.
They have to wait, or sometimes the post offices in some of my rural communities don't even open because they don't have enough personnel in the event that there's a sickness or an accident that the post office. So, I mean, where do we go from here? And what is the impact of your recommendations and the Commission's recommendations on the Postal Service? And was it really a good decision for Congress to take away the real oversight that Congress had previously in running and overseeing the Postal Service? When I first came to Congress, I was on the Post Office and Civil Service Committee. And we had the Postmaster General in frequently talking about these matters. But once congressional direct oversight was removed, it appears to me that the service was degraded and it has constantly gone down. I think my time is about expired, so if you have a comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, we will continue. I think we just finished some work in your district as well, looking at service in Georgia, and we will continue to issue reports in that area to shed light on where some of these problems occur and to make recommendations for the Postal Service to address some of the staffing challenges that they face.
Thank you very much. Now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to sort of pick up on that line of questioning from Mr. Bishop and Mr. Loloda, I mean, I get the same letters apparently they do from people who are, unable to get into the post office during the hours it's supposed to be open. It's not staffed sufficiently or just closed entirely. My district is fairly densely populated. This letter I just got a little while ago is from a town called Laurel. It's about, 10 miles from here or something like that, fairly heavily populated. I will say I've been hearing about these same kind of concerns for a while too, and all the way back to when I was a staffer in the 80s here in Congress. And I guess I'm not understanding, and I appreciate your answers on this, but I guess I'm not really hearing how we actually are going to fix the problem or what steps the Postal Service is going to take, hopefully sooner rather than later, to address these concerns. I mean, what are the immediate steps that are going to be taken in the short run to address this?
I appreciate the question. I am the Inspector General for the Postal Service, so I can't answer for them on what steps they're going to take to address these issues, but we will continue to make recommendations and to hold them accountable to the degree that we can in our work to address some of these concerns.
Fair enough, but as the auditor, you've taken a look at steps that have been taken previously.
Right.
Have there been steps that have been taken recently that have been effective and would lead you to recommend going forward, you ought to take these steps to address this problem?
Yeah, there is one thing that the Postal Service has done in the last probably 3 or 4 years is they have reduced the time to hire. And so they're getting people on board more quickly. One of the challenges with that is that sometimes the people that come on board don't have a good sense of what the job is all about. And they arrive and they don't stick. They don't last. Retention is a challenge for many of these employees. So we issued a report on hiring and found that. We said that the reduction of time to hire is good, but you have to pair it up with the interview process, or at least an ability for the candidate to experience what they're getting themselves into.
Fair enough. I got to move to my next set of questions, but if you could, supply whatever additional comments on that, that would be appreciated. When Mr. Pocan was asking you questions, he raised DOJ as a topic, and you said, I guess you'd been part of a meeting that had been held with DOJ?
We had one short meeting with the DOJ representatives at the Postal Service.
Okay, and when did they come?
I don't know when they came, but I know we met with them probably 3 or 4 weeks ago.
All right, were you in the meeting?
Yes.
How long did the meeting last?
It was probably 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay, so you covered some ground then during the 45 minutes, and they were asking about what? What was the thrust of the conversation?
It was mostly us talking about our work. So it was less about them asking us questions and mostly us sharing generally what we do and some of our results.
Well, I would ask, Mr. Pocan has asked that you provide the names of the people who attended. If you could provide a letter that summarizes, I think in some level of detail, sort of what was covered, I'd greatly appreciate that. And I also want to ask you, you mentioned a couple of things about 100,000 leads that you don't have the resources to investigate. And I think you also said you can only do 8 to 10 of those per year. I wasn't sure what those were. That
when I was speaking of those, it's not the same as the 100,000.
Okay.
That would take forever for us to get through if it only took 8 or 10 a year. The 8 or 10 a year is our where we go out and look at a plant and the 3 or 4 delivery units around that plant. So it's kind of a community look at how the Postal Service is serving that
This is
community.
with respect to deliveries?
Yeah.
Okay,
Processing and delivery. We just finished one in Macon, Georgia, in that area.
All right, let me go back to the 100,000. What resources would you need to be able to move forward with those?
We would appreciate just enough resources to get us back that $306 million that we asked for would really be helpful in that space.
To hire additional investigators?
Investigators, and auditors, but investigators would help us make progress on the 100,000.
Real quick, to Mr. Lolota's point, about 14% are prosecuted when they commit robberies against letter carriers. Who conducts those investigations?
That's the inspection service, the postal inspections, and not us. We're the external law enforcement entity. The inspection service is the internal law enforcement entity.
All right. Have you done an audit of, frankly, the caliber of the investigations they're conducting?
We did look at that as part of our work on mail theft, because it does raise a question, right? It seems as if there would be better prosecution rate, but there are lots of issues with that, and we didn't see a lot of problems with the caliber of the investigations that were conducted. So
okay,
we can get you that report if you're interested.
Yeah, I'd be curious as to how you can only be at 14%. I appreciate the new bill that's being offered, but if there are federal investigations and you got sentencing guidelines governing the sentences anyway, I don't know that that's going to fix it. It seems like there must be another piece with respect to the strength of the cases that are being brought. But Mr. Chairman, I yield back and thank you for your indulgence.
The chair would now recognize Mr. Alford for any questions he may have in this lightning first round here, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Let me get my act together here for just a second. Sorry, just left the Small Business Administration markup. But thank you, Chairman Joyce and Ranking Member, my good friend Steny Hoyer. Thank you for holding this important hearing today. The Post Office is one of the few federal institutions explicitly established by the Constitution. The founders saw it as a core function of the federal government, one of the few that they believe Washington should handle. In recent years, the Post Office has consistently failed, though, to meet its basic obligation, delivering mail on time. It's one of the most common sources of complaints that I hear from my constituents back in the 4th Congressional District of the great state of Missouri. Rural Americans in particular are being left behind, waiting days or even weeks for letters and packages to arrive. A small business in my district called Cackle Hatchery is one of the few remaining hobby hatcheries of chickens in the United States, and they rely on the United States Postal Service to deliver these live chickens that have a lifespan in the mail of about 5 days. The problem is they're not getting there. The chicks end up dead. The insurance is not covering it, and they're losing $40,000 a month. Cackle Hatchery raises and mails those chicks to make a living for themselves and to offer these chicks that grow up to be chickens that, you know, the price of eggs these days, we need laying chickens. Well, another constituent has told me that due to delays in receiving their paycheck, they face having their electricity and heat shut off due to overdue bills. They want to pay the bills, but it's not getting to the people, the utility companies. Delays like this are why I was proud to introduce the Pony Up Act alongside Congressman Graves and Congressman Cleaver, a bipartisan bill to force the post office to compensate constituents for any late fees due to late delivery of bills. Ms. Hull, thank you so much for being here. We had a great discussion before this committee hearing began. Do you think the Pony Up Act or similar legislation would help incentivize the post office to deliver mail to rural Americans on time?
I haven't analyzed the bill in depth, but I do believe that work to put attention on this area and to really push the Postal Service to deliver on time would be a good thing. I'm very interested in the business that you spoke of that ships baby chicks. We're in the middle of doing an audit right now on the shipment of the Postal Service, and because we call it shipment of lives in the mail. And so we've never looked at that as part of our OIG work. And so we thought that would be a really good area for us to look at, because the Postal Service is the only logistics entity that ships baby chicks, things like that in the mail. So that I'm not sure we've spoken with your constituent. We've spoken to others in the business, so maybe we could reach out to you and talk with them about their experience.
I will facilitate that for you, and love for you to come down and visit. It's a great operation there in our district. I'm going to move off my scripted questions. Sorry to the staff on that, but you and I were talking. What problems has Amazon posed for you? in delivering U.S. mail. The added increase in Amazon deliveries, even on Sunday, by U.S. postal carriers.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that question effectively because as we do oversight of the Postal Service. So, but we've seen kind of it's there. You know, Amazon is a customer of the Postal Service, and in some areas where unanticipated deliveries have come into the system, it's caused problems. We did some work in Minnesota a year or so ago and found some problems there, but I wouldn't be able to answer broadly on that.
We talked briefly about the problems at the Kansas City Distribution Center. Part of the problem was the returns of Amazon, which stacked up and is causing chaos in this huge distribution center and affecting people all over that region of Missouri.
Exactly. Returns have been a problem. Amazon returns, particularly in locations where they consolidate the returns, and Kansas City is in one of those, and we've seen problems related to both just the congestion and also the challenges with employees potentially stealing from the returns that come in.
I have 10 seconds left, basically. I highly encourage the Postal Service to get its workforce straightened out, its hiring practices. I visited with a postmaster there in my district. This person was in tears because the hiring practices is done over the internet. They hire people, they come in for the job. It's not what they thought it was going to be, and they can't retain anyone. I think that's part of the issue. With that, I yield back, sir.
Thank you, sir. Since there seems to be some interest, we'll start a second round here of questions, and I'll acknowledge myself yet again. If I'm not mistaken, the Postal Service, when they deployed a 10-year strategic plan, Delivering for America plan, projected significant overall savings for the Postal Service. In 2024, your office audited the Delivery for America's financial projections. As you know, the plan projected positive net income for the Postal Service starting in FY 2023. Contrary to those projections, actual results show net losses, including $6.5 billion in 2023. Can you, General Hull, explain why Postal Service's financials deviating from the DFA's predictions? And has the Postal Service updated its projection after reviewing your findings? And what can we expect in future years?
Yeah, in that report, the Postal Service indicated to us that inflation had a significant impact on their financials. And we looked at that and did find that inflation had an impact. But we also found that work hour reductions, which is what saves the money on the salaries and benefits side, were not occurring as quickly as they had projected. And as a result, a lot of the savings that they had intended to get out of the DFA were not being experienced. They believe they might be delayed, but we saw that they had not yet been experienced. So we did recommend, as you said, that the Postal Service, we said that the financials that they put together, in fairness, during the middle of a pandemic, so they put together these financial projections. We said, you know, things have changed dramatically since that then. So we recommended that they update their financial projections so that Congress and others can be clear on when they expect to get into a better financial place. Thus far, the Postal Service has not released, at least publicly, financial projections that are into the future like they did with their first Delivering for America plan.
Wasn't it fair to say that it's a wild deviation from being in the profit to being a $5 billion loss?
Yes.
And you say most of that is failure to maintain overtime, I guess, is what you're saying? The people are working too much, or they weren't curbing the...
No, some of it was inflation. Some of it was the issues with them not being able to reduce their work hours as quickly as they had planned to. And then there's a segment of this that inflation has an impact on, in that the Postal Service calls it non-controllable, or they have a controllable section and a non-controllable section. Basically, in the non-controllable section, it's mostly impacts on some of those large liabilities that I talked about earlier, the CSRS and the FERS retirement benefits, as well as the workers' comp programs. Those are in what they call non-controllable, because inflation and higher interest rates in those places has significant impacts on losses or gains, depending on the financials, basically. So they have a controllable and a non-controllable. It's complicated. The Postal Service financials are kind of difficult sometimes to decipher, but yes, they clearly were far from what they originally projected, which is why we believe that it would be very beneficial to them to come out with additional new projections.
Do you think it'd be beneficial to deviate from the original Delivering for America plan to something that works?
I think that obviously there have been many issues in execution of that plan. So I think looking at the plan is not a bad thing to see if there are needs to change the direction.
Recognize Mr. Hoyer for any questions he may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Did they call you General Hull?
You can call me whatever you would like.
No, I can't do that. I wouldn't do that. But in any event, Ms. Hull, can you tell me how many pieces of mail are delivered daily by the United States Postal Service?
It's in the millions and millions and millions. I don't have that number with me, but I can get it to you.
Well, it's well into the hundreds of millions. And your job is to oversee, in part, the efficiency and effectiveness of the operations, correct? What I'm interested in, and I've discussed this before with the Postal Service some time ago, when, like Bishop, it was the Treasury Postal Committee, and we did have jurisdiction over the service itself. Do you have any knowledge of whether efficiency vis-a-vis hundreds of millions of pieces of mail being delivered on time at the right site to the person that was the addressee, vis-a-vis the mistakes and the slowness of delivery? In other words, have we gotten less efficient, more efficient, stayed the same? Is that part of your analysis that you do?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have done that analysis. We've tracked things like service over time, trending in service. I think one of the challenges the Postal Service faces is that mail volume, as significant as it is, has declined pretty significantly over time. And we have a paper that's coming out probably in the next month or so that talks about mail declines over time and projections into the future of what that could look like, because you have to think about that as you move forward and determine how to size your network and where you need staff and things like that.
In many respects, that's due to digital communications.
Right.
Yeah. I'd like to get some sense, and by the way, I think our committee also has an interest in what you say reporting to the Oversight Committee in terms of that, because to some degree that impacts on our responsibilities as well, and yours. I want to go to DOJ that met with you. Was there at any time, was there a discussion about any study that related to the complement of federal employees or postal employees that were needed to do the job that was expected of them? In other words, what I'm saying, was there anything which DOJ or you based your analysis on the proper level? I happen to believe the government needs to be right-sized. And whatever we ask them to do, they need the right number of people to do it. And if we don't want to do it, we need to cut the number of employees. But I have not heard of any studies on which DOJ is relying to come to a level of employment, particularly when you send 2 million people a notice that you can quit if you want, and we'll pay you for the next 6 months. Do you know of any such study, and was any discussed?
I am not aware of any study, and we did not discuss that when we met with them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the second round. I want to move on to facilities and kind of some of the current concerns we have there. In December 2024, then Postmaster General DeJoy claimed over 31,000 facilities were in shockingly horrible condition with over $20 billion in deferred maintenance. And so my biggest concern with this is I am worried about not only the conditions for the workforce, but also for executing their jobs effectively. So do you think that these deferred maintenance issues and the, frankly, ill-equipped buildings are actually slowing down services for the American people?
What we've seen as we go out and do our work, I talked about that when we go out and do local work where we do a plant and deliver units around it, we see lots and lots of issues with deferred maintenance, lots of issues with ceilings falling down or broken things in the parking lot, potentially safety issues to some degree. So we have launched a job that we're in the middle of right now that looks at deferred maintenance more broadly across the Postal Service, and we hope to issue that probably in 3 or 4 months. So we'll know more when we look at it broadly. We just know kind of the individual situations that we've seen that are pretty shocking in some places.
Well, certainly we want to make sure we're reaching, if those facilities are in my district, I want to make sure we're getting on them to get those things fixed,
Right.
and that we're prioritizing safety. And how are you going through those investigations? You mentioned you're going to have a report out in a couple of months. How are you going through that process to provide then hopefully recommendations to USPS?
Yeah, we'll be looking. We're doing field visits. I think we've been to I think we've been to Dallas, New York, and maybe Boston so far. But we're also incorporating what we see when we go out and do the local work into that job. But we're looking at the processes, right? The Postal Service should have processes for reporting when things are broken so that they can be fixed. This is not something that they haven't done for many years. They may have neglected it, or they may not have put the money towards it. But it needs, these things should have been reported and should have been fixed. We'll look at timeliness of addressing issues when they are reported. We'll look to see if there are issues that haven't been reported, kind of the entire process to see, and we'll make recommendations to improve in that area.
Okay. Are there any recommendations you've already made to USPS that they have not implemented properly, or things that could significantly improve service along the way?
Yeah. On the deferred maintenance, I'm not aware of any that are still open. When we go out and look at the individual plants and delivery units, we will make recommendations locally to address the things. For example, if we see a broken toilet or a ceiling that's falling down or poor working conditions, things like that for employees or customers, we'll make recommendations for fixes there. And generally they handle those pretty quickly. But I mean, there are 30,000 or so places around the country we can't be in, many of them. So
I would be interested do you have any district by district or maybe even state level data that you could share with me specifically for Iowa, but I'd be interested in seeing those breakdowns.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Edwards from North Carolina for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hull, I'll shift gears just a little bit to my district, NC11, was hit on September 27th by Hurricane Helene, probably the most devastated district across the southeast from that hurricane. We've got a number of post offices that were destroyed that are still inoperable. Constituents are getting antsy. In many cases, folks have to drive up to an hour to get to the closest post office. What can I take back home and give them some confidence that those post offices, those facilities are getting the attention from the folks up here in Washington, D.C. that they deserve? And could you share any sort of process that you might have in prioritizing which facilities are looked at first?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll address your last question first and then get into kind of the suspended post office situation. Generally, when we're deciding where to go and look in those local projects, we look mostly at service level data. We look at how the community is being served in the service scores, whether there are routes that are not being delivered, things like that. We haven't, I don't believe, incorporated post office suspensions into that. That might be a good thing for us to incorporate. But to get to your question about the post offices in North Carolina, that's something that I will take back and we'll see. We have done, as I told Congressman Mr. LaLota, that we've done work on post office suspensions in the past. I don't know how long it has been, but we'll go back and look to see if that's something that we should do again. And if so, we'll incorporate the work there. We did go during the election process because the hurricane came through right, I think in October, September, late September, October. We did go out and look to see how the post offices in your district were handling that, because there were some concerns about voting by mail and how that was going to be impacted. So we did do some visits there in that election cycle, but it's something that we could go back and revisit.
I'll just say thank you. I'm definitely going to have my staff follow back up with you, but because it was 7 months ago.
Right.
We were hit by this storm, and we still got post offices that are not operable. Folks are getting impatient, and they deserve the service that they had before. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Now recognize Mr. Alford. You've done very well here. You got in. Now you're getting 2 lightning rounds in. And
No, I love it. Thank you. Appreciate that. I love having the second round. We can dig a little bit deeper. And thank you, General Hall, for again. I don't know if you covered this because I was in small business. Did you talk about the local transportation optimization in your testimony?
We did speak a little bit about it, yes.
Can you delve into that? Explain how this works and why, when you did your audit in, I think, Virginia, it showed an 86% of the zip codes affected by the LTO plan were in rural areas, and that service performance went down significantly in the weeks following that. How is that affecting my district in rural Missouri?
Yeah, we when the Postal Service decided to do this, basically what it is doing is it used to go, the Postal Service used to go out at the end of every day and pick up mail that had come into the post office during the day, and then bring it back in the evening at night to be run at the processing plant. Oftentimes, at least according to the Postal Service, there wasn't a lot of mail there, and it was costing a good bit of money to do those routes. And so what they have decided to do is, instead of doing that evening route to all of these post offices, they would pick up that mail in the morning when they bring the mail to the carriers to be sorted and delivered. So instead of doing 2 or sometimes more than 2 stops a day at a post office, they're just going to do the 1 in the morning. So what that generally does in many of those locations is add at least a partial delivery day, to some degree a full delivery day on that mail. The Postal Service maintains that the LTO that they did was a pilot project, and they did it in, I believe, 15 locations around the country. And then they filed a service standard change to add a day of a delivery to the service standard for those locations that would
cover
be
that
impacted.
loss.
Yes.
How much money did that save in doing that?
Well, it's just rolled out, I believe, in April, or early April. I think they project that there will be several $billions of savings annually associated with that. But so far, it's just starting. So that's one thing that we will be looking at, is whether or not those savings are being realized as part of this implementation process. But another thing that we'll be looking at is what the service implications of that are, and whether or not the Postal Service is able to do this, provide this service within the 5 days that they have projected that they will be able to meet. So it's a big change in the postal network, something that could have significant implications.
For my last 2 minutes, I want to go back to the workforce issues. I think this is very important for the stability and long-term survivability of the Postal Service. What changes do you recommend we make in that? The hiring process.
Right. I think that the Postal Service really needs to, when they hire, you can hire quickly, but you can hire badly quickly, and that's not helpful. So I think making sure that when they do bring someone on board, that it's someone that understands the nature of the job and is willing to invest in that. The Postal Service, I think, is a bit of a throwback organization. I have a lot of passion for what they do and how they serve rural America, but it's a tough job. Many of these jobs are very physical and they're very labor intensive, and you don't see a lot of jobs like that in America, at least to the scale the Postal Service has nowadays. And so making sure that people understand what they're getting themselves into when they do come into the Postal Service. But it's also a great career if you know, especially for people that may not want to get a college degree straight out of high school. There's a lot of opportunities that the Postal Service can offer to people in that space. So I think
But they're
engaging.
applying online and they come in and they accept the job and they don't know what the job is and then they quit when they find out how tough it is.
Yes, exactly. And so making sure that it's clear, talking to a supervisor before you show up on day one.
You got to have a face-to-face
Right,
interview at some
right.
point before you.
And
offer
having
it.
the supervisors be upfront about the job, what it entails, how much they're going to need to work. Many of these incoming people have to work, 6 days in a row every week or things like that. It's a tough job. And
Mr. Chair, may I ask one more question? Thank you. Appreciate that. Look, I know the Postal Service is provided for under the Constitution. I don't think should ever be privatized. But are there things that you're looking at in the private sector, processes at Amazon? I mean, you can get things at your doorstep like that. UPS. Are you looking at these and trying to adopt the best practices so that we can have the best postal service in the world?
We're looking to see whether the Postal Service is doing those things, exactly what you're saying in our oversight efforts, trying to make sure that the Postal Service is looking
Are they?
outside. Maybe inconsistently. I think in some places they are. I think in some places they could do a better job of looking at private sector best practices and implementing them within their organization.
Because I get the feeling that they don't want to look at that and compare themselves with someone who might be doing a better job. But we each do that. I mean, I look at Ranking Member Hoyer, how I can be a better statesman. We've got to look at our best practices, whether it's our prison system that we're involved in appropriating, whether it's how we function as a body here on Capitol Hill. But I applaud your efforts in your oversight, and we're behind you, and we want to help. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just follow up one question, Mr. Alford?
For more praise for yourself?
I appreciate it. We and I became good friends on travel this last week, and we had known each other very well. And I urge everybody in the Congress to travel with one another and leave the shores where we're sort of line up against one another and go when we're Americans representing our country overseas. And it was a delightful effort to get to know Mr. Alford better and look forward to working with him. And you, Mr. Chairman, of course. Let me ask you something. Has there been an assessment of the postal services of the international community? And if so, where do we rank?
It depends on what the metric is, but yes, we've done some good research work in that space, looking at where the Postal Service fits in the postal community, international postal community, and depending on what you're particularly interested in, we have lots of work in that space that we would love to share. But it is service is one thing, price is another thing. How there's lots of ways to look at the posts and how they compare against each other.
I understand a lot of metrics. Has there been any assessment of where we stand, generally speaking, in the postal services everybody has a postal service?
Yeah. Again, we've done some. For example, we did some work on looking at first class mail stamp prices and how the Postal Service compared, and actually found that the Postal Service is one of the least expensive posts around the world to mail a first class letter. We've also the work that I spoke of earlier on the privatization or the structure thing is the most recent work we've done in that space to look at how the Postal Service compares structurally, financially, what are the universal service obligations that are required for each of the posts. It's a very interesting paper and gets into a lot of what you're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. And with that, our hearing has concluded. I'd like to thank General Hull today for being here, for her candor. And there may be some members who would like to submit questions for the record. Please submit any questions for the record to the subcommittee staff within the next 7 days. We stand adjourned.
Ms. Hull?
Thank you. Great to see you.